Hey everybody, Steve Fredlund here. Welcome once again to Just Steve. It's a podcast where it's pretty simple. It's just me sitting around with people that I find super interesting and having interesting conversations. And this week is no different. I'm thrilled to have Matt Berkey with me. Matt is a professional poker player. He's also the founder of the Solve for Why Academy, helping people train and learn about poker using sort of a different approach than a lot of the standard training sites. Now, the front end of the audio got a little bit jumbled, so we're joining Matt about 30 seconds into the conversation. So you'll hear pretty much the entire thing, but the first part of it is chunked off. One thing I want to draw your attention to, if you're not already connected with me, I would love to have you go to stevefredlund.com, sign up for the newsletter. But a pretty exciting announcement in my world is that my first TED Talk was just gone live. It's out at, you can search for it. It's on my website, stevefredlund.com. Otherwise, just go to YouTube and search for TEDx Steve Fredlund. I talk about the power of shared passion using an analogy from my trip to Rwanda. And I call it making sure that we have the right peeps in our Jeep. It's really about making sure that we have the right people with us along life's journey and how life is just so much better when we're surrounded by the right people. So I'd love to have you check that out, like it, share, comment. Let people know about it. That would do me a huge favor. But with that, why don't we turn it over here and we will join the conversation that I had with Matt Berkey.
Spawned into both the live academy now and an online training site. So the majority of my time is really just cranking out content at this point. I'm still probably playing like 500 or 600 hours a year, but obviously a lot less than whenever I was in my full grind mode.
Okay, so this idea to shift into a poker academy as opposed to focusing on playing, what was sort of the impetus there?
I thought that there was a huge gap in the market for specifically the live professional. So I thought sites like Run It Once are the best in the industry when it comes to poker training, but it's really geared towards people who are going to play mass volume online that are being paid cents on the dollar for every decision that they make. And in my opinion, that's just not how live poker works. Time is the ultimate equalizer. If you're only going to get to play a couple hundred hands and your entire goal is to outmaneuver your opponents for the maximum EV, then it's just natural that it's going to be pretty exploitative. So I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we had RFID technology long before it was popular, and we had a really strong production crew. I was like, well, if we could teach to first principles of game theory and then demonstrate it exploitatively through the gameplay, our commentary, our criticisms, and things like that, people will have kind of a roadmap moving forward as to what they can focus on, what they can improve upon, and study along those lines.
And as we've gotten to know each other a little bit, as I've kind of studied your stuff and learned from you, what I love is sort of how you think about things at a higher level. You're kind of getting into some of that right now, but you have this different paradigm and perspective toward poker than I think what a lot of people have. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and then shift to what does that mean for us in our regular world? Because I think your life perspectives, I think, are really enlightening too. But this idea of solve for why, where does that come into play in teaching poker?
So I guess it's kind of born off of, in 2012, I went broke and I spent a lot of time just doing, the transitioning into my 30s self-actualization that's kind of necessary in order to figure out what the hell you're going to do with the rest of your life. And one of the main, thought leaders that I was following at the time was Simon Sinek. And he has this concept of start with why.
Yeah.
And it really resonated with me. Just kind of basically, it's not a novel idea. It's been around forever, but the idea of root cause analysis rather than trying to just address at a shallow level the errors that are taking place. And in a game like poker that's so heavily nuanced, you'll just get caught up in the wash of trying to solve every single tiny little spot. There's a lot more there are a lot deeper layers to each and everything, and it becomes a lot more practical instead to pick out a big root cause that you're hoping to ultimately arrive at a conclusion with. So I guess to me, I saw a direct parallel to poker that was like a one-to-one, but on a bigger scale, I saw if I could prove this concept in the realm that I feel like I'm an authority, then I see a pathway to, I guess like translating this problem solving methodology often to other communities, be it ones that I'm interested, like fitness, nutrition, body optimization, and things along those lines, or even ones that don't necessarily parallel to my life in any way, shape, or form, but I can potentially like lend a platform to other experts.
I love it. I love Simon Sinek. It's interesting you mentioned him. I think he still has my favorite TEDx talk of all time, I think it is Start with Why, and like the golden circle concept and all of those things. And I love, did you know that like that talk was delivered in front of like 12 people? Like the actual talk was like at some really small location, but it just took off. And I think what I love about it so much is it is this sort of sounds like complex, but it's such a simple idea. And I think that's what you're getting at, right? This idea of start for why. Like, well, duh, of course you should start with why, but I don't think we do that naturally, right?
Well, I think asking why is a very complex question, where identifying what the problem is and how you're going to solve it is much simpler. It's easy to say like, I'm not winning money under the gun, and then just say like, so I'll play fewer hands, right? So what's the problem? I'm not winning out of position. What's the solution? Don't play out of position.
Yeah.
And that's not actually a solution. That's just a tactic. It's a Band-Aid, right? Instead, if we say like, well, why am I not winning under the gun? We could maybe like start to look at, well, you play too many hands, or you play hands that are just concentrated to value. So your strategy becomes very transparent. And now all of a sudden the solutions are very different in those two paradigms, right? If you're just playing only value hands under the gun, the solution is to actually add hands so that you're more difficult to play against, which is actually going to complicate your strategy then on future streets, which now means that the ultimate root cause is you need to become a better post-flop player. And that's not at all what was initially being addressed whenever you're saying, I'm not winning out of position, right? It's just like, oh, okay, then I'll just stop playing out of position. It's like, no, actually you got to become a much stronger post-flop player.
And I think people that aren't poker players are going, what language are you speaking? But right. I think the idea here is just like you're saying, like why is hard. So we choose the easy. So we choose the tactic. Mm-hmm. And you're sort of in this mindset now of trying to figure out how can we incorporate that into making people better players, optimize their results, potentially optimize other areas that you're interested in as well. But do you see this as sort of, is this a human characteristic of just choosing the easy way because why is too hard? Or do you feel like, are people like naturally just saying, I'm not going to go why because it's too hard? Or do they just not inquisitive enough to even know what questions to ask? Like, what do you think our biggest hindrance is?
I think that like, through the evolution of society, what and how served us very functionally, right? So if you go all the way back to like prehistoric times or whatever, it's like, well, I'm getting sick off of this meat. So what's the solution? Fire. Right. And granted, that's a big solution. Like, right. it's an invention at that point. But, for a long time, we were progressing in a way where we were very rudimentary and basic. So these big inventions had massive impact. And thinking in terms of like, what is the solution? What's the demand? What's the problem at hand? And how can I solve it? Was very functional. But once we get past the Industrial Revolution, where now technology is taking over, the why element becomes a lot more critical. So now all of a sudden, I know I made a poker analogy before, but let me make a more wide sweeping one that applies to most people. If you say, the problem is I'm overweight, and you look at that from the shallow standpoint of like what and how, and it's like, what's the problem? I'm overweight. How am I going to solve it? I'm going to eat less, right? Or I'm going to eat better. But those are just tactics, and they're unsustainable, because the fact is, if you became overweight from eating too much or eating incorrectly, then that is the paradigm that you live in. That's the habit that you formed. That's the template that you utilize to live your life, because eating is a function of being alive, right? So you need an entire paradigm shift, and you need this massive overhaul where now you need to be educated not only on how much you should eat, but what you should eat, how you should marry that with your exercise, like how that varies, and like how imprecise this calculation actually is. Right. So we try to oversimplify as humans because it's the only way we can wrap our heads around this super complex mathematical world that we truly live in, where oftentimes luck is the dictator as to whether or not you are succeeding or failing, whether or not you are attractive or overweight. Like in a lot of ways, there's a lot of variance that's involved in that. So it's hard for people to parse that and just say like, oh, okay, I understand. There's some things that are within my control and some things that are not. But when you start to look at like root cause and start to really peel back the onion and say like, why am I overweight? Now we can actually start to point fingers at things. It's like, well, I don't know anything about nutrition. That's a really great start.
Mm-hmm.
The second somebody can humbly say like, I don't know anything about nutrition, therefore I'm destined to be overweight, it's really easy to correct that now. It's like, okay, I'll educate myself. But you know, time is a commodity and not everybody wants to invest it in personal optimization or things like that. Like, I think whenever it comes to default tasks, things that you're forced to do every single day, we want to treat it the same way we treat sleeping and breathing.
Yeah.
Right. That is just going to occur. I'm just going to eat. I'm just going to drink. I'm just going to do these things. And I don't want to have to put any mental energy into them whatsoever.
And this is why I think we all just want that easy pill. We want the magic pill. We want the easy result, right? And so kind of like to your point, you know, somebody says, okay, I want to lose weight. I want to go try this thing, pay $50 and just all of a sudden magically I'm going to be skinny. And people say, well, it's not that easy. You actually there's a process. You got to solve for why. You've got to figure out what's going on there and then change your mental state. And people start going, all right, I'm out. Can you just give me the answer? So do you think that sort of that limitation, and I have this in several areas of my life, sort of, I want the easy answer. Oh, it sounds hard. I don't have time for that. I you know, or I don't have the energy for that. Is that character flaw? Is it a personality disability? Is it leftover evolutionary simplistic thinking? Like, what do you think is at the core? And I know it's different for everybody, but generally, what is that core? And maybe you see it in poker players. They come to you and say, Matt, help me. And they just want to know how to play pocket fours under the gun. And you're like, well, it's way more complicated than that. And they just say, well, forget it. It's too complicated. Like, what is that in us that drives us away from looking for the right answer because we want the simple answer?
I think it's just, I think it's a combination of all those things, but I think it distills down to utter arrogance, like just pure and utter hubris, where we somehow are all born into this level of privilege where we have so much self-trust that whatever our perception is, as biased as it may be, we believe it to be truth. So the idea that reality is a perception and it's unique to each individual is very likely to be true. But we all believe our own personal reality is the reality that's projected upon everybody. And I think that this is exactly what causes these issues of not wanting to explore root cause. It's the arrogance that there's no way somebody who's telling you something that should be very simple is complex can ever be right. And I think that we, as a society, and especially as a capitalistic society, where markets are driven by what they can basically sell you,
right.
We've sold the idea of simplicity across the board for everything. So no matter how complicated the problem, we are the dominant race and we'll figure out a simple solution to it. And what I don't think people understand is simplicity is on the other side of complexity.
Yeah, I love that.
It's not the precursor, right? You arrive at simplicity when you understand things intimately and you've complicated them to the point where now things become very easy. Everything slows down. Sport is a great example of this, right? You're not just born with the ability to hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. You get to the point where like you are so talented or you're so trained that you can hit 90-mile-an-hour fastballs repetitively. And now hitting an 80-mile-an-hour fastball is simple, right? Nobody wants to challenge themselves in that way. We desperately lack grit. And I think it's kind of born out of complacency because we've been so privileged for such a long period of time. And honestly, we're in a weird time with this pandemic, but I think that it's going to bring out the best in those who comprehend this idea of grit and this idea of, really digging deep to pull the best out of themselves and individuals around them. And I think you're going to see, the rest of people just kind of like getting dragged alongside of it. The same will happen when automation becomes widespread.
That's so good. So there's like 15 different angles we could unpack there.
Yeah.
So this idea of simplicity. So we've sort of been sold constantly, right? A marketer's job is to make us think that they can give us something that's simple. So right. We sort of have this now built into us that answers are simple. So as part of this, then when I come to Matt Berkey as I want a simple solution for my nutrition or my poker or whatever, and you give me some sort of complex answer, I initially think, okay, you're trying to upsell me to something more complicated because it's going to make you more money, because I'm in this paradigm that says, well, this should be a simple answer.
Right. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
I think for us, it's just all about being upfront and transparent, where it's just like, okay, I'll lay on the table your problems before you even tell me. I'll lay it all out there. Here are the hurdles that you've been running into. Here are all the milestones where you plateau and then fall backwards. Are you tired of that? Like, are you in enough pain from being beaten down by the simple process that you're willing to actually take on some short-term frustration in order to get over the hump? And the people who say yes, like, are very successful. The people who think that like they can just buy a high-end product, they fall by the wayside pretty quickly.
So now, do you realize that sort of your paradigm toward the world is different than the majority of the people? I mean, are you aware of that, or are you so surrounded with people that think like you that you don't realize, how sort of revolutionary this thinking is?
No, I stick out like a sore thumb even in my group. Like, even like using Christian as an example, he gets so annoyed at the idea of me constantly trying to push harder. But I mean, I don't think it's unique to necessarily me. I think people with athletic backgrounds can understand this. I think people who are born into trauma can understand this sort of mindset. I keep using the term grit because it really is this idea of like, no matter how good you have it, there are other challenges and hurdles ahead. And it's always this idea of like trying to run through brick walls that forces you to kind of complicate things. And I know that the common pushback is, well, you're not speaking to people in simple enough terms. So, it's over their head, or you're overthinking it, man. You're in your own head. You're overthinking it. It's just like, okay, from the outside looking in, I could completely understand where that's your vantage point and you're entitled to it. But look at my resume. Like, I'm not overthinking it. I don't deserve the things that I have. They're born out of hard work. And most of it is through having this other like vantage point of it. And you can point to others and say like, well, they took a different lens. They simplified it this way, that way, or the other. It's like, yeah, but you know what? They're probably a lot more talented than me.
But that is what you do, though. You do take this simplicity on the other side of complexity approach. It is complex, but you need to get the information you need so that you can wrestle through the complexity. But then you are able to present things in a simplistic way. I mean, even the way that you're sort of explaining it here is hours and hours and hours of sort of wrestling. How do I communicate this sort of stuff? That comes up with a fairly simple response, but it's not. It's not an easy placebo that people are looking for. I'm curious, like on your worst days, when people are saying this to you, you're overthinking it, man. I mean, do you just want to be like, well, you're underthinking it? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
Do you feel like, I don't even have time for you? You're just underthinking it, or like how do you respond when you're like not at your best?
I mean, I clap back a lot, and not even necessarily when I'm letting my guard down and not being political about it. I do it because I think people have a big misinterpretation of me. I think people think that like either I'm full of shit and just use a ton of big words to make myself sound smarter, or I'm smarter than the people I'm communicating to, and I'm just talking down to them. And I would say that it's likely neither. Like, my vocabulary is what it is based on being studied. If you're aware of my origin story at all, I grew up in a poor, rural steel mill town. Like, nobody's using college words, right? So it's like, I don't communicate this way because that's the environment that I came from. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth where I went to private school or anything like that. I'm used to communicating in very dumbed down terms. And like, when you watch me live stream, a lot of that comes out because I'm not on. It's 6 hours. Like, you just get to see me stripped down. But if you hear me in a 10-minute interview where I need to convey things in the most precise way possible, while giving like gold as much as I possibly can, not using fillers, there are a lot of big words that substitute for a sentence. And that's very impactful, I think. You know what I mean? So I think that like I clap back a lot because to me, it's just a born-in excuse of like, oh, you're using fancy words. I don't want to hear what you have to say. It's much simpler than that. Or you're in your own head. You're not as smart as you think you are. There's a lot simpler way of going about this. And it's just like, okay, well, let's look at some of the things that you consider to be simple. Tell me about pod odds, right? Like, tell me how pod odds impact our decisions. And you'd be shocked. Like, people that I have a lot of respect for don't understand the simple pod odds model. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't understand that level of math, then I promise you, you have no idea about the chaotic system that's actually driving poker. You're just blissfully ignorant, right? You're just dealing. You're on the fringe of luck every single time you make a decision, and you've just been fortunate enough to be chosen.
And one of the things I love about you in that, even just what you shared there, and I've listened to and watched some of your interviews, like one recently they did with Christian Soto, and some of those things where it just feels like you're just, this is how I think, and I'm not going to apologize for how I think. But you're humble enough to say I could be wrong, but this is how I think, and here's how we need to approach this. And you're not sort of always caveating everything with, well, that's just the way I think, or it's just in my opinion. Yeah. You're just sort of, that's embedded in how you talk is, this is what I think about it, and sort of take it or leave it. There's sort of this, I'm not going to say an edge, but a little bit of a take it or leave it kind of thing. If you don't agree with me, I go find somebody else. And first of all, I'd like to know, is my assessment correct? Do you feel like that's a correct assessment of you? And secondly, did it take you a while to get to that point of that level of confidence? I know you said you came up in a poor background. You've got a desire to be a pro baseball player at one point in your life, and kind of working through the ranks and that sort of thing. Did it take you a while to get to that level of confidence, or is that something that was just sort of part of who you've been your whole life?
I mean, yeah, you're definitely right. I have a very take it or leave it mentality, but not in the sense that I'm not open to discussion.
Right.
It's more so in the sense that I'm not open to criticism without the caveat of telling me why I'm wrong. Don't just say I'm wrong. Like, I'm not going to respond well to that, but say I'm wrong for reason X, Y, and Z, and we can have an open debate. And I feel very confident in my ability to defend my side because I don't just say things. Like, most of these concepts I've kind of like mulled over for a long period of time. Yeah. So as far as like being confident in the things that I say, I think that I've always kind of had that. I've had a lot of self-trust whenever it comes to my ability to kind of like soak up information and be able to regurgitate it in a way that makes strategic sense or logical sense, depending on what the topic is. But I was always very shy, and I kind of kept to myself. I didn't really gain that platform, or I didn't try to gain that platform until I started like rising through the ranks in poker. And I think a lot of that is just parallel to baseball. Like, when it comes to athletics, it was something that I coveted and put very high in as far as like defining myself. I'd much rather be defined as an athlete than an intellect, at least at a younger age. But I was very mediocre. So constantly battling that mediocrity and not overinflating myself. Like, I just couldn't. I couldn't ever look at the results and think differently. It's like, I see my results. They're very mediocre. And I just never had any arrogance really around my athleticism, despite me putting such high value on it. So it was constantly this uphill battle of me having to be semi-humble in this thing that I took a ton of pride in. And then on the backside of that, it's like, well, for as mediocre of a baseball player as I may have been, I understood the game cerebrally better than 99% of my counterparts. Like, from a strategic standpoint, I could see the game moving in slow motion. And you could argue that it's baseball, it's always in slow motion. But I mean, like, pitch by pitch.
Yeah.
I could see the sequence of pitches and just understand how one would play off of another. And, these dependent conditions that would occur you'd see the wheels turning in batters' heads. And, even on the flip side, when we're on offense, you could just see these potential exploits opening up. And I always thought that way. And we would have these long discussions in our meetings, and I was always at the forefront of them. So I had a lot of confidence in the lens through which I saw, I guess, the world. And I think a lot of that just comes off of, maybe just excelling in certain areas as a kid intellectually, but also just constantly having problems to solve. Growing up the way I grew up, it's like, I didn't have the luxury of just waking up every day, mailing it in, and then coming home. It's like there was always things on the table that I had to adult for at a very young age. It's like when you're 10, 11, 12, 13, and you're taking care of your parent effectively, you learn very quickly how complex problems are and how critical it is to start thinking of things from a bigger picture standpoint rather than just what's going to get me through the next minute, hour, day, month.
That's so good. So in poker, if I think about this, you can conceptually see it all. You get you can understand exploits in poker, and you've got the educational and communication skills and the sort of the platform, the wherewithal to be able to take that and build on that. So when you think about the baseball side, I imagine how frustrating that had to have been to feel like I have all of the mental capacities to get there and I'm understanding the game at a higher level, but for whatever reason, my fastball couldn't peak over
Yeah.
90 or I couldn't hit the splitter or whatever it is. Having that physical limitation, that had to be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. And, at that age, you don't really understand it. You think you're
Yeah.
just a few more hours of hard work away. So I would just slave over it. I would spend 8 hours a day in the gym. I stopped going to class after my freshman year. I would literally just wake up, go to the gym.
Of college, right? You play college ball.
Yeah. So I was in computer science, so it was a lot of hands-on learning anyway. So I would just show up the first day of class and say, I'll be here for the midterm and the finals. If you want to dock me for not attending, fine. I'll come to office hours when I need help, and all my assignments turned in. So I just treated college as a complete and utter business. And I was in the business of making it professionally in baseball. So I would just go to grind all day long at the gym. And honestly, I was probably doing a lot of it wrong because there was nobody there with me. I didn't have people who were better than me at the game, putting in the same hours. I didn't necessarily have coaches taking a big enough interest where they were willing to spend 6 hours with me. I remember with my poker winnings, my sophomore year, the very first thing I bought was a crappy old digital camera. And I would film every single pitch I threw in practice. And I would pick it apart by angles, by slow motion, frame by frame, just every single thing I could, trying to figure out how I could get over the hump of these physical limitations, thinking that okay, I'm 19, I'm throwing 84, 85. When I'm 22, I'll be throwing 86, 87. It'll naturally progress. And it just didn't. And it was I just hit this wall and I could never understand why.
Yeah, that's tough. But I think a lot of us sort of struggle with that in different areas of our life, whether it's physical limitations or whatever it is, where we feel like I can do this. I know I can be a successful this, that, or the other, but there's just something that's getting in the way, and that can be incredibly frustrating. So then, how do you channel that disappointment into something positive? I guess so. For you, baseball. And maybe it's a grieving process of realizing you have to give it up, but then somehow you're able to take that energy and channel it into something positive. And I'm curious if there's a theme in there for our listeners to say, okay, I've got disappointment in my life. I've got things that I thought I could be, but I couldn't. I didn't have the educational. I wasn't smart enough to learn organic chemistry or whatever it might be. That was a limitation. And I think some of those things we just die and we just go to our grave with, and we don't actually take that and translate that into something positive. I'm curious if you have any insight into how we can take our disappointments and our limitations and actually turn it into something positive in our life.
I mean, it's weird because obviously I'm speaking from reporter privilege. I got extremely lucky. The parallels between baseball and poker are 1-to-1. I mean, they're just so fundamentally identical, all the way down to how much variance is involved in each game. So having a natural aptitude for poker, mostly born off of my strategical aptitude for baseball, just allowed me to excel really quickly. And poker solved a big problem that was weighing on me at that point in my life. The big grieving process of baseball wasn't necessarily that I wasn't going to get to play at the highest levels. That was a big part of it. But the bigger aspect of it was I'm not going to be a professional athlete and I need to be something else now. So I've predefined myself by this dream. And when that fell through, it's what are my options? I don't want to be a computer scientist at all.
Yeah.
Right. So it became this thing where it's well, who am I going to be in adulthood now, if not this athletic person? And I got very fortunate that poker was an outlet I could actually explore. So I think for a lot of people, maybe they turn a blind eye to secondary opportunities because it doesn't feel like it's going to fill the void, or it doesn't feel like it really has the same big picture promise that the initial dream did. But I see this all the time. And I get pitched stuff all the time.
I'm sure.
Between watching Shark Tank and then just being in business now and constantly having people pitch ideas my way, the ability to take criticism and suggestions is imperative to being happy. It is just absolutely fundamentally necessary in finding your own self-confidence and happiness. The ability to take rejection and be told no. All of these things, in my opinion, are born into people who ultimately become great at something and are absolutely resistant in those people who consistently fail. People who come to me with the worst ideas tend to be the ones that I'm on the phone with long enough, or the longest period of time, talking them off the ledge. And it's such a waste of my time. And more importantly, it's a waste of their energy because they're trying to convince me of something that just has no legs whatsoever. And, their pushback almost is never founded in anything other than emotion. So if you can fundamentally say, like, listen, I'm studied in this, there's no market for what you're trying to create. Even if there was a market, your execution is lacking and you're going to have these 10 hurdles in front of you. And their response is like, yeah, but people are bored, so they'll watch anything. And this falls under the category of anything.
Of anything, right?
Right. It's just like, there's no value to that, right? Like, what's your value anchor? What are you offering in exchange for their loyalty or their dollars or their viewership or whatever? And it's always like some fluffy emotional thing of like, well, I love this, therefore they will. It's like you're just projecting your own bias. So it's like, that's frustrating because I think those people want to be something that they're not. They want to be visionaries. And they're always idea people with no execution, right? Yeah. So it's like, okay, let's pretend this is a good idea. How am I going to execute it?
Yeah, they're dreamers.
Right? Yeah. So it's like, how am I going to execute this idea? Like, tell me this. And they're like, I don't know. That's for you to decide. It's like, okay, well, you didn't give me anything. Ideas are a dime a dozen, right? Finding the actual path from A to Z is where you provide value to me as an investor or as somebody who could potentially execute it, right? It's like, I've never gone to a pitch meeting with just a concept and know how or what, right?
Yeah.
The why is obviously important. It's very critical. Like, this is why I'm passionate about this project and why I think you should be a believer too. But here's the easy 1, 2, 3 of what it is we're going to create and how we're going to get there.
It's this idea of, if you're just, strategizing without vision, you're just passing time. If you have vision without strategy, you're just dreaming. And so you really do need to have both. And one of the things that you mentioned there is something that, something that I'm personally working on. I know some of the people that listen to the show are working on too, is how do we not have our emotions tied to our ideas? It's exactly what you're referring to. So I come up with this idea and I have now an emotional vested attachment to it. I bring it to you and you say, I don't like it. And not only do I now realize it's a bad idea or have your perspective that's a bad idea, I'm now emotionally hurt. And so I think some personalities are bent to be more susceptible to that than others. But I think that's what you've called out as a good distinction for a lot of us to keep that in mind, that ideas are one thing and our emotional attachment is another thing. And I think you probably see that in the poker world, right? Where people are trying to make logical best decisions, game theory optimal or whatever types of decisions, exploitative decisions, but they have their emotions now tied on this. That guy's out to get me, or whatever it is. And so we're not making the best decisions because our emotions are so tied up in that.
In both of the examples that you gave, it's not the emotions that are the problem. It's attaching monetary gain to those emotions that becomes the big hang up, right?
Okay.
If you're emotionally attached to an idea and an investor says, I don't like it, then that's fine. You just pass on it, right? And maybe you pitch it to somebody else, or maybe you go back and rework it and say, like, let me see what about this idea he was critical of to move forward. But whenever you attach the idea of, I'm going to be a millionaire off of this idea, and that's all that's driving you over and over and over again, whenever you're trying to execute, it's like, this is such a good idea, I'm going to make infinite money, right? People who come with like widgets and these little knickknacks and things like that to Shark Tank, where they're like, sharks, there's such a need for this, yada, yada, yada. I'm confident we can do X million over the next 12 months, over the next 18 months. And then they reply with, okay, but what's your business? Because this is going to die.
Right.
This is just a product. It's only going to be, it's novel. It's going to get, bought, or it's going to be circumvented by a bigger company, yada, yada, yada. Who are your competitors? And they're always just like, I don't know. I don't know any of that stuff. What does it matter? This is a great idea. Right. Can you get it patented? No. Okay. So you don't have anything, right? You literally don't have anything.
And now you just told the world your idea that's not patentable.
The fact that you just told us, I could go out, pay $10,000 to somebody else. I don't need you.
Right.
And I could just recreate this idea. And people get very emotionally hurt by that. They're like, no, you can't do that. Like, this is my idea. It's like, Well, you're
Mm-hmm.
not the only person to ever have an idea. And if there's nothing proprietary about it, then it's not even an original idea necessarily. Like for example, Poker Out Loud. It's our flagship product. It's the thing I'm most proud of.
I love
It's
it.
not an original idea.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't like I had any knowledge of the fact that Negreanu did it on Poker VT in 2009. I didn't. I had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we were doing something for the very first time ever. But when I found out that he had done it in the past, it's like, okay, that makes sense. It's not that original.
Right.
And I'm happy to tip my cap to him for being the first one to do it. But I'm confident our execution's better. And that's all that matters. Right? It's our product because we're able to execute it better. We're able to make it proprietary to us.
And people are paying to watch it. Right.
Yeah, nobody's going to be able to duplicate this product. And that's so critical. It's the same thing in poker, right? It's not that you're emotionally attached to your decisions where you don't want to be criticized. It's that the emotions were driven by the idea of, if I do this thing, I'll make more money right here, right now. And whenever we're able to flesh it out off the felt and say, well, that's just fundamentally not true unless you get lucky in that moment. That's the thing people don't want to acknowledge, is what you're really doing is you're paying for luck.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all just to feed your emotion.
Well, and I love what I'm sensing here is this, maybe you see it already too, but this parallel between these things and your baseball perspective. It's almost like it's sort of what would you say, like predefining your identity. Like I look at this widget, I think, oh, this is gonna make me millions of dollars. So now I've already started to get myself into this identity of a millionaire. So I bring it to you. Now you crush my dreams, and now it's almost like my identity is crushed, even though it was never your identity. It hasn't become that. Even so, your baseball thing is almost the same way. Like you see yourself as a pro baseball player, you see it, and so your identity has become a pro baseball player, even though you're not there yet. And so having that dream crushed is sort of killing your identity, which is super painful.
Right. Yeah, and with that comes a lot of pride. So we see it in the poker community all the time too. People will scale up to a certain stake, and then something will happen, be it life or variance or bad play or whatever, and now their bankroll can't sustain that stake anymore. But because they've defined themselves as a 5-10 player, they have too much pride to drop down to 2-5. And now they're flirting with gambler's ruin, or the gambler's ruin fallacy, where it's like, as your bankroll decreases and your risk stays the same, it's a mathematical inevitability that you will lose all of your money.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to start wrapping up here. I mean, dude, you're one of these guys that I could talk to for hours. I've said that before, but before I wrap up, I'm curious. We'll let folks know, how can they connect with you? So people are listening to that going, okay, I thought he was just a poker guy. This guy seems like he's got wisdom beyond that. How could they connect with you, either for poker, or maybe there's some other things that you're doing that they'd like to tap into?
Sure. I'm always open. All my DMs are open on social. So Berkey11 on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And then anybody's always welcome to shoot me an email at berkey@solve4whyacademy.com.
Awesome. If you guys didn't catch that, I'll put it in the show notes, or if you want to connect with him and you didn't catch it, let me know and I can reach out to him. Matt, we'll come right back in a second. You can close us off here. But if you guys are listening out there, you're like, man, I like what I'm hearing. This is pretty cool that you get to listen to all of these interesting people 3 times a week. If you'd like to support what I'm doing, a few things that I would just personally ask for you to consider. One is, as soon as the episode's done, go out there, like, rate, review it, subscribe to it. If you're not already doing that, if you could mention that you listened to this episode on social media, you can tag me, you can tag Matt. That would be cool. Go to stevefredlin.com, sign up for the newsletter. And if you want to support financially what I'm doing with the podcast, with the Rwanda videos, some of the other creative things that I'm doing, patreon.com/stevefredlin. $1 a month or more, you can support this thing financially. And I appreciate all of you guys who have sent all of the encouraging letters as we've gotten this thing rolling. It means a lot to me. So keep that going too. I don't mind that at all. But with that, we'll come back to Matt to close us off.
Oh.
Just like that.
I feel so attacked right now.
You feel attacked?
Not attacked, but like just so on the spot.
I'm putting up a comment. So this is this is the organic nature. So I'm just boom, let's go. Here's the thing. So I don't like self-promotion. I'm super bad at self-promotion. So like I'm being vulnerable. So like even just reading that stuff or kind of going through that stuff, I'm like, oh, gross. Let's just get through this. I don't like this stuff. Let's just talk to Matt again. So I like rush through that stuff.
It's so important. It's so important. Like I learned the hard way. I'm the exact same. But especially if like you're just doing organic marketing.
Yeah.
What you don't understand, and I'm the exact same way. It just comes with being uncomfortable, like soliciting yourself. But the people watching are massive supporters of yours, and asking small things of them in return for the value that you provide is never too much. Like most people are willing to go above and beyond anything that it is that you're willing to ask for. So I think like, opening yourself up, putting those messages out there, doing it in good faith, where you're basically saying like, this is going to allow me to help bring you this content. Also, it's going to allow us to, maybe help address the greater good moving forward. I think all of that's like really great. It's a message that we try to package into all of the stuff that we do as well. And I'm very confident that your supporters will be lining up in droves to help.
Well, I appreciate that. That's sort of my MO. Like, okay, I want to do that. I want the support. I mean, no question. I want the engagement. But when it comes to the actual time to do it, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like I get through that and I quick run back to you and say, okay, quick, close this off, and then put my guests on the spot like that. But yeah, as we're sort of, whether it's a favorite quote or whether it's sort of final words from the discussion that we've had today, I'll kind of leave it to you to kind of bring us home.
Yeah, I would just say that for me anyway, like life is kind of a journey in constantly knowing more than your former self. So, we do all have this a little bit of pride and arrogance in us, and I think it's okay to feed, but I think it should be in a way where we're competing against ourselves, not against one another. And the easiest way to do that is to have this altruistic, greater good mentality where it's like, well, how can I make the version of myself today better than the version of myself yesterday that will help the greater good? And honestly, like it's a really powerful tool to be able to reflect back 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, and look back and say like, wow, I've really come a long way. I used to be an idiot compared to what I know now. And like that's a nice feeling, because what it means is not just through experience and effort and everything else, but through acquired knowledge, you've become this newer version of yourself. It means that you're constantly learning and trying. And at the end of the day, our bodies are going to fail us, and we're going to be on this earth for a long period of time. But like, God willing, like your mind is going to be intact the entire time. So for me, that's the tool that I constantly want to sharpen and kind of never get off that beaten path.
I love it. Well, there he goes, Matt Berkey. Thank you again so much for your time. Always a pleasure.